My name is Jeff Rona, and I'm a composer. We are in my studio here, which is in Santa Monica, California. I've been composing music for film and for television for a while now, for about maybe 14, 15 years of doing it professionally. Before I was composing for film, I played a number of instruments. I started off as a woodwind player, and that's where I studied. I studied art and music in college, studied a bit of composition, conducting, orchestration, things like that as well as fine art. I left college to pursue music, and I started off working actually at A&M, where Herb Alpert was president at the time. I had a small office with a small job of writing music for high school and college bands and orchestras and choirs, and proofreading sheet music. I was in their music division there, and that was actually kind of fun. And then I was always very interested in technology, and this was back when there wasn't a lot of it available. Synthesizers were still quite cumbersome at the time in the 80s, mid to late 80s. I had a very bizarre little sideline for a few years writing. I taught myself how to write software, and I worked for one of the major companies developing musical instruments called Roland. And I actually developed software and instruments for them, and this was right when MIDI became a phenomenon, and somebody had to be in charge of bringing MIDI into the world and creating a kind of a global effort. I became that person for 5-6 years. I was the head of the MIDI committee, as we'd call it, so I was very involved in that. But all along, I'm playing music, I'm composing, I'm working with dance companies, I'm working with choreographers, I'm working with doing avant-garde music. I start doing synth programming in recording studios, and I'm working with pop stars, pop artists. I did a lot of work with Earth, Wind and Fire, and Maurice White, who's the head of that, was a record producer, and I worked on a lot of his records, and with David Foster and a lot of other people. Worked on some synth programming for touring bands, including Madonna. And eventually I seemed to develop a bit of a reputation as the guy to call for interesting sound development for composers who were doing film. And so I found myself working with a lot of interesting people from the ground up, doing sound, programming synthesizers, sampling, which was still a bit cumbersome at the time, to help these composers do more contemporary and interesting scores, because that was becoming more in fashion in the early 90s. So suddenly I found myself working on movie scores, and this really was film school for me. This is my music school, was being at the elbow of a composer from before the first note to the final delivery, because I kept coming in to do more and more. And I got to be the fly on the wall, watching how composers worked with directors and producers, and I started to understand the language of film music, which is such a radically different language than the language of concert music, or of pop music, or of jazz, or anything else. Film music is its own world, and if you don't treat it as such, and if you don't approach it as such, then you have a very hard time writing music that really meshes with the story and whatever's going on in the film. I started to do a bit of ghostwriting for some of these composers, and kept meeting more people. And then I happened to meet a couple of people, again, doing sound work, for doing synthesizers, working with Mark Isham, and especially working with Hans Zimmer. Hans and I became very close, and eventually I moved in, and we shared a studio for about 7 years, and I worked on a few films with him, but mostly we were just friends sharing studio space. There was a whole group of composers, very illustrious group of composers, and it was like another film school in a way, because down the hall were some of the best composers imaginable, and I'd go and listen to them, and they'd come in and listen to me, and we really had a wonderful camaraderie and support, and then he introduced me to some of the opportunities to do some writing on my own and not just be a ghost. So that got me launched doing my first projects. Before working in films, I was I did a lot of television. I did a lot of television in a very short period of time, sometimes doing 2 or 3 programs all at once. And I started working with director Barry Levinson on a television project called Homicide, which ran for 4 years. I did the first 2 years of it. And worked on a television series called Profiler, which ran for like 4, 5, 6 years. I did the first couple of seasons of that. Worked with Steven Spielberg on his first television project, which was a short run, ran for 2 seasons, called High Incident. Did some comedies, did a lot of TV movies and miniseries. Then I was asked to do, my first film was actually working with Ridley Scott on a film, well, it wasn't a small film, it wasn't a very successful film, called White Squall with Jeff Bridges. And that was a great education for me, doing my first film and doing it with the London Symphony and really getting that. And, I've done films on my own. I've done a lot of films in collaboration where I've done a lot of musical contributions to films that had, a number of people involved. I did a lot of music for the film Traffic. Worked with Hans on a few films such as Black Hawk Down, Gladiator, Mission Impossible 2. I did a lot of music for the film The Mothman Prophecies. Did a bit of music for the film The Net, The Fan, which was a Tony Scott film. And then, like I said, just tons of television projects. They did a television adaptation, a miniseries of Traffic, which I did on my own. That was just a couple years ago. So, and tons of things that I can never remember. Every project that I get involved in is typically has things about it that are quite unique. So one of the first things is to be very sensitive and understand that you're part of a collaboration, that you're part of a team, and that it's not about you, it's not even about your music. I mean, the music has to be terrific and it has to stand up as music, but the process of writing a score is first to try to really suss out what the creator's vision is, what the creative vision of the film is, and then figure out the most creative and personal way to achieve what it is that they hoped you would do. So in a way, your job is to surprise them by giving them exactly what they want. Does that make sense? So typically I get hired because somebody's heard something of mine and they like it, or I may be asked to be one of a small number of people to submit some pieces, some pieces of mine. And if they hear it, then I get called in for a meeting. A meeting is a chance not only for them to get to know me, but for me to get to know them. And it's important to have it kind of work both ways. Then once I've begun a project, it typically begins with getting to know the director a lot better, really understanding what they want the film to feel like to the audience. A character may seem like an evil guy to me, but might be very ambiguous to the director. And the director may say, no, don't go evil. Let the audience wonder for a while. He doesn't get evil till about, 15 minutes into the film. Then you can go ahead and let the audience know this guy's evil. But, it's things like that. So then once everybody kind of has a sense of what's going on, the next step is usually something called spotting. And that's where the director and I, and often a music editor, and sometimes there's somebody called a music supervisor who's in charge of looking into the use of songs and additional material in addition to score. And so there's always a need to coordinate, which scenes are going to have songs, which scenes are going to have scores. So there's somebody named a music supervisor. Anyway, some group of people sit down to decide where the music will go, what the nature of that music will be, and we make a list called a cue list of each of the cues. So a feature film may have, anywhere between 45 and 75 minutes of music, broken down into pieces that could be as little as 10 seconds or as long as 15 minutes. And before I sit down to actually write the music, what I like to do is, before I put the picture up on my screen, is to sit down and just think out loud. I'll usually write a little suite of ideas with only the vaguest idea that, this might be the hero's theme, and this could be the love theme, and this is the villain theme, and this is the action theme. So I'll just write some pieces and make them a kind of an interesting, like, little 5-minute suite. And then I'll bring it to the director, or have the director come and just say, hey, what do you think? I have some ideas. They're not to picture, they're just ideas. And depending on how they respond, if they like it, and they go, oh, that would be great here, and this would be great there, I'm off and running. Or I maybe trash that and try it again. So we spot the film, we develop the list of pieces. I write some pieces not to picture. Once I feel that I have developed the language, the vernacular of this film, thematically, stylistically, is it jazzy, is it tribal, is it high-tech, is it orchestral, is it crunchy guitars? Then I pick a scene in the movie, usually pick the one I want to score the least, and I score it first. Each director has a whole unique approach to the way they think about music. Some directors don't really want a lot of music. They want the music to remain somewhat neutral. Some directors want the music to be an absolute character in the film. Some films are very music-driven, action and thrillers and things like that can have, a nearly wall-to-wall score. So, yeah, different directors have a very different view of the process and the product. When you work in television, you work exclusively with producers. In film, it usually is the director with the producer there just to be a second opinion. Usually. Sometimes there are there's some producers, there's certain types of producers who insist on having a more active hand, but typically on a film, the director gets to call the shots, gets to kind of lay out the roadmap and then decide what is or isn't working. I gain enormous inspiration from certain film composers, and I think it would be a mistake for anybody to try and achieve success in a field without knowing what's come before you. Because either you end up reinventing the wheel, you end up unintentionally plagiarizing somebody, or it just doesn't give you an opportunity to truly move the art form forward. You can't move forward if you don't know what you're moving forward from. So I don't think it really pays to be too naive about the genre, even if you're untrained musically. And actually, in many cases, due to technology, there's an entire generation of very successful, and I would say very talented, film composers who don't read or write, don't have technical skills, but have just a knowledge. They have a deep understanding of music, and specifically film music. Unlike songs that get placed into a film where they're licensed unexclusively, they typically have existed on a record of some kind before, and they're just being borrowed, if you will, licensed for this one use in a film. My work is typically designed to be exclusive. It'll exist in that film and that one film only. Although there are cases where pieces I've written for films have been relicensed into other films. So my work is work for hire, and so I get hired one of two ways. There are what are referred to as packages and fees. The fee is the more traditional way, although it's quickly vanishing. But in a fee, and this still exists on the bigger films, they say, look, we will pay you X dollars to write the score, but then you give us a budget of what it's going to cost to record and produce and mix, and then we will cover that. so that way the composer's money is guaranteed. The money that's offered goes into the pocket, never comes out. And that's a fee-based deal. In a package-based deal, it's quite different. The filmmakers will come to the composer and say, "Look, we have this many dollars all in, but we want some live stuff. We want 20 Burundi drummers, and we want singers and monks and guitars and whatever. Whatever is left, you do that, and whatever's left is yours." Does that make sense? And that's a package. They write one check, and you become not only the composer and the producer, but you become the accountant as well. And you best do a good job, because if you blow it, then you end up doing the film for free. I don't know if music can make or break a movie. I don't really know very many people who go to a movie because of the music. Certainly not with scores. Nobody says, "Gee, let's go see the newest James Horner movie." I don't even think people go to see the newest John Williams movie, unless it's Star Wars, in which case they're seeing it because it's Star Wars. So I've seen films in which the music may have been there may have been a missed opportunity. I've seen a tiny number of films where I thought the film was better than the music. 90% of the time, though, I see films where the film is, take it or leave it, but the music remains exceptional. There really are very few misfired scores. But when I do hear a score and I don't like it or think it was badly done, I always remind myself that every note of that score was listened to and approved by the director and producers. No composer gets to decide when their music is done or right. That's all decided by the filmmakers. So everything you hear in a movie theater has been approved, usually with notes back to the composer saying, "Well, make it more exciting there, or darker there, or start this piece sooner, or gee, maybe thin it out, or gee, let's beef it up." So I don't think there's really occasions where a film makes or breaks. Every so often a film has a soundtrack that becomes such a significant marketing aspect of the film. Less and less lately, people point to, I'm forgetting about musicals for a second, like Moulin Rouge or Sound of Music or anything from any period. But Dirty Dancing was a film that, the film did well because it had the biggest hit of the year on its soundtrack, and if you wanted that hit, you had to buy that record, and it got people to go out and see the movie. And it wasn't a very, very good film. It was actually a fairly slight, little, silly, romantic comedy in a way. But that score became a phenomenon. And I guess there's been one or two since, High School Musical, things like that. But by and large, the music, music definitely makes a film work. You pretty much never see films without music. I can only think of one or two. And it was done as an effect. It was definitely on purpose. Let's see what it would be like. But Woody Allen has done one or two, and Alfred Hitchcock did one. Actually, he did two films with music. So there's no question that music does, maybe I should say that music makes the scene. I don't know if it makes the film, but films are very unconvincing without music. When I approach a film, I need to make some decisions about how I'm going to approach it. And sometimes I may do a bit of research. I may go out and get some records and listen to Russian music or Asian music or Balinese music. I'll go to my record collection. I'll listen to classical music. I'll steep myself in music that I think is significant to what could exist within the score in some way, even if it's in some tiny way. Maybe listening to percussion instruments from China or something like that. And so usually I know some vague sense of the direction with the director before I've done anything. A composer never starts from scratch. A composer always starts with something in the director's mind. They always have something in mind before they've hired a composer. They're always thinking, well, I want a dark, creepy orchestral score. I want a score, just thick with guitars, or I want to hear lots of cool, weird ethnic instruments. I love, flutes or ocarinas or, Tibetan trumpets or whatever it is. So a lot of the decision is made for me, but ultimately I'm responsible for coming up with the true final concept. And so that just involves that process I was saying before of writing little sketches and doing little demos, not to picture, but just to write pure musical themes, just to develop themes. And within those themes, developing the texture and the sound, the timbre, the vibe of the music. You approach the discipline of film music realizing that every film score ever written was written under a deadline, where every Academy Award for music has been won by somebody who was under a strict deadline. It may have been a more intelligent deadline than some, because sometimes it's absolutely insane and you have to write, an hour of music in 2 weeks or less. But every score is written under some kind of strain and hardship and under duress. So, you don't get to, first of all, you don't get to make any excuses, you don't get to say, well, I wish I had more time. Well, everybody wishes they had more time. You maybe wish you had a bigger budget. Well, everybody wishes they had a bigger budget. In theory, your creativity should be non-compromised by any logistic, practical issue. A good idea is a good idea. So, as a composer, I'm responsible for a lot of logistics, because it's not just about writing all the little notes. It's about writing it, recording it, arranging to get it copied and scores and parts put in front of the musicians, hiring of soloists, singers, mixing, final editorial, and delivery. And that actually amounts for probably nearly half of your effort and time. I have an assistant, most composers do, and you're still on the phone constantly stamping out fires and checking on things and seeing if everybody else has sort of, done what they're supposed to do. If you're an aspiring composer interested in film, the first thing is to really decide if it's what you really want. All too often, there are people, and I meet lots of them, so I'm not saying this as a stereotype or cliche, but there are a lot of university-trained composers who studied formal classical technique and training and think that that is what film music is, because there are films that have cool orchestral writing and avant-garde writing for horror films, what have you. And there are songwriters who become frustrated with their craft and the fact that the record business has sort of come to a bit of a screeching halt. And all these people think, well, I know what I'll do. I'll be a film composer because I can do that. So the first thing for an aspiring composer is to make that decision. Am I committed to the language of score? Am I committed to putting my ego on a shelf, listening to what I'm told, listening to what I'm told to do, executing it, re-executing it, re-executing it in some cases? And do I really have an understanding of how music enhances or detracts from a scene in a film? Really be committed to understanding, as you said before, the history of film music, the concept of film music, the language. It's a language. It's a nonverbal language. And just make sure that you really get it. I remember once I was up at the Aspen Music Festival, where I'm an artist in residence occasionally. And there was a young composer from Juilliard, getting their master's degree. And they wrote very vigorous and rigorous, very highly avant-garde orchestral music. And I played them a piece. We were listening to different pieces, and I played them a piece that Mark Isham, who's a great composer, but he writes very melodically, he writes very simple music, but it works. And I played this piece for that group, and after hearing, pointing out the enormous difference between a score like his, or score like mine, which can be very, very simple, and her music was very rigorous, very, very avant-garde. I said, well, don't you think you could write something like that? And she said, yeah, but I'd never put my name on it. So I realized that if you're embarrassed to write a major chord, then this is probably not the field for you. Because sometimes we get to write cool, weird, electronic or orchestral, scary, textural stuff, but then sometimes we're called upon to simply make the audience cry or feel emotion at all. And that's very hard to do in a foreign language, If somebody who spoke Greek tried to comfort somebody who spoke Hungarian, they couldn't do it. But if you learn Hungarian, you can do it. So the language of film is very much the same thing. Well, I should say the language of music itself. The people who go to a movie, the people who go to a romantic comedy, in most cases, really have a sense of music that's happy or sad, or that has pathos, or that has sympathy. And we as composers can't just go off and break those rules and build our own. There are many styles of music that can work in a romantic comedy, but it's somewhat narrow compared to all the other possibilities of music. So a film composer has to realize that they don't get to invent everything. They have to follow the rules a bit. Writing music by the yard, I certainly have met composers who kind of have their bag of licks and riffs and tricks, and they're unhappy people, and their whole thing is well, I'm going to do an action thing, so I have these little action phrases that I love to use. I'm going to just use them again. Versus, well, in my style, I tend to gravitate towards certain kinds of rhythms and certain kinds of tonalities and scales. There's a difference. To be your own cliche means you've given up, you've abdicated you've abdicated all sort of creative ethics in your life. And then why are you still here? Why don't you just go sell real estate? Or you may have ideas that reoccur over and over in a film, but every film is fresh and a new approach. And for me personally, I have never written music by the yard. Even if I've done a little copying and pasting between pieces, everything I write ends up going through the filter that is me, thinking about is every note in place, and trying not to be lazy, and trying not to fall asleep at the wheel, because what's the point? Technology has become essential in the role in a film composer's world. Producers and directors know what our technology can do, just like they know exactly what a picture editor's technology can do. So a director can say, let's take those two shots and flip them to an editor, and they know that that's 3 mouse clicks and it's done. They're not asking something, well, go take lunch and when you come back I'll have it. With composing, it's very much the same now. Directors know that we are capable of a pretty good imitation of a full orchestra, that we can create sounds from anywhere in the world, any era of time, any style of music, and that the computer using sequencing software is sort of the palette upon which we paint. And so we have, we may write 10, 20, 30 pieces of music in a film, and they all get, they all end up as files in the computer. But when you play them with the right technology and knowing how to use the technology, you present. So after you've written a few more pieces, you have the director come and you play them off of your computer, and they have to sound really good because that's the expectation. The bar has been raised very, very high. I think of my studio as my instrument. And to that extent, no instrumentalist can truly move an audience if they're not really brilliant at their instrument. So, an amateur violinist, it just sort of scratches out and sounds pretty bad, but a brilliant concert virtuoso violinist can bring an audience to tears. An amateur cannot. with composition, obviously composition can leave you cold or it can engage you, but since our goal is to create music at the highest level of production quality, like a record producer does, goes beyond the composition into how good it sounds in the recording. Playing your studio like Jascha Heifetz plays the violin is very important because there's a difference between passable and brilliant. So, and also for me, since a lot of my scores are electronic anyway, my demos are the final score. So they better be damn good and put a lot of thought into it, because anybody can go to a store and buy a synthesizer, whether it's, you know, hardware or software or whatever, and it comes with 500 patches and everybody uses them, and drum machines with loops and everybody uses the same loops, and it becomes predictable and it becomes cliche. So I believe very strongly that the depth of my knowledge in the science of and technology of my studio is no different than what a fine instrumentalist puts into their time, so that they get to become as expressive as possible. Without technique, there's no emotion. My studio has simplified over the years as I've moved from hardware to software. I have a computer, a Macintosh, running software which lets me sequence my keyboard, play acoustically into it with my flutes, or bring in a guitar player or singer or something, loop processing, a lot of things. It's where my music lies in my studio. I then have another couple of outside computers just for holding on to orchestral samples, so that I don't have to reopen them every time I open up a new song, because it can take a long time. So I have 2 computers just for just a sort of a sample farm. Everything moves digitally through my studio, and it flows into a program called Pro Tools, which is only for doing audio. But it's the program that every recording studio in the film business uses. So all these dub stages, all these sound stages are pretty close to 100% Pro Tools. So I use Pro Tools simply as a method to deliver my score. My studio is set up in surround, so I have 5 speakers and a subwoofer, and I compose my music in order to take as much advantage of that as possible without becoming distracting and clever. And everything else in my studio is basically software. I mean, I have some keyboards and a little control surface and some drum pads, but all the sound and all the processing, all the reverbs, all the EQs, all the effects, all the compressors and limiters are all 100% software. My career and my personal life are at various times in and out of balance. This is a career that involves an enormous sacrifice in terms of time. Commitment is often enormous, if not overwhelming. And many people in my field end up in and out of relationships as a result. You have to be with somebody very understanding to deal with the late nights and the weekends and all the extra hours. My feeling is this, in terms of how I balance between my personal life and my professional life, is I think of it as a pendulum. Pendulum is in balance even when it's moving. It swings left and it swings right, and then it swings left again, and as long as it swings roughly the same amount, if you average it all out, the pendulum is in balance. It's moving through a center point, but that center point is fixed. It's the balance point. It's the fulcrum. Sometimes all my time is spent pursuing my work, and then there are times when I take off and I invest it into the other things in my life that are important to me, and give myself a break. Neither one is balanced, but when you add it all together over the years, hopefully what's achieved is something that sort of resembles balance. I think that being a composer, just like being any kind of artist, is always enhanced by being a broader and deeper person. Some people seem to be can be very sequestered and still be able to grind out great ideas. But I mean, I rarely go to hear music when I'm not writing, but I go to museums all the time. And I go to films all the time. Movie theaters are a great, great, great place to learn film music. In fact, probably the only true school of film scoring there is a movie theater. But, you know, I read, I do a lot of things. I also spend time in nature. I'm down at the beach a lot. I live near the beach. I also live up near there's a canyon nearby that I go hiking in. So I watch after, you know, I try to keep my mind and body and spirit in some sort of form that makes me able to withstand the rigors of this role. And at the same time, you know, at some point, you're sitting in a room with a bunch of really interesting, often very well-educated people. And, you know, directors are often very interesting people. And if you have nothing to say, then you're kind of boring, you know? You know, obviously your main role is to compose music, but, you know, they're not looking for, you know, organ grinder monkeys to write scores. Sometimes you want to go out to dinner or grab lunch or just chat for 5 minutes while your computer is rebooting after it crashed. So I think that having depth in one's life, depth and breadth, not having your whole life be about the one thing you do for a living, even if you're passionate about it, having other things that are of interest and value, whether you do them or simply enjoy them. As time goes on, you're glad that your life is multifaceted. You know, makes you an interesting person all the way around. It makes you of greater value to yourself. I don't know if it makes you better at a job for everybody. I know some people who I don't think it affects, but I mean, yeah, absolutely. And you know, you go to, especially listening to classical music or listening to music period and using it as a springboard for ideas. You know, if you hear something, if you hear a record producer do something or a DJ or a programmer do something that's quite vital, or a classical concert composer do something unexpected and vibrant, not to go rip them off, but to say, well, let me see how I might adapt that into what it is that I do. You know, whether it's taking a vocal phrase and chopping it into 100 pieces and rearranging it into random order, or writing highly bitonal or atonal music for orchestra and hearing how different people do it. I enjoy reading biographies of artists and seeing how people live their lives. You know, some composers or some artists, you know, are often selfish, self-indulgent, narcissistic. Some are not. It's always good to just it's good to know the world. And yeah, you know what? I would say that my music is highly influenced by who I am. And so by developing who I am throughout my life, because it never ends. You know, there's no such thing as there, you know? There's no such thing as there in life, there's no such thing as there in art, there's no such thing as there in career. There's always more to be done, there's always more to learn, there's always more to explore, there's always better ways to do things, there's always more. You know, it's Walt Disney made the fallacy when he said, and they lived happily ever after. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist anywhere in life. There's always a process before us. My life is not given meaning by my influence on pop culture, however small or large it is. I mean, you know, I travel all over the world, and it's always a kick to turn on the TV and go, wait a minute, that's me. You know, gee, I guess everybody in Tokyo is watching this or whatever it is. And you know, that's great. That there is a bit of gratification in that. It's pleasurable to know that my music is being appreciated. You know, that's the nice thing about what I do is since it's being pre-ordered, I know that it'll be appreciated. With, you know, a symphony, you just never know what's going to happen to it. Catch as catch can. There's a lot of people writing symphonies that never get played in their lifetimes or any other time. So it's kind of nice to know that my music is reaching ears and hopefully hearts and minds. That's really what... You know, I will say this. My goal is, and my pleasure of writing music is that what I do is about emotion. Whether it's happy, sad, frightened, romantic, erotic. I know that what I'm going to do is going to move people, and I do believe very strongly that that emotion is something that too many people that I've known have taken too much for granted. So anything that makes us feel more human, and I think one of the reasons that we go to the movies and watch TV is to watch very human stories, whether it's solving a mystery or a love story or a soap opera where everybody's miserable. It brings up emotion. We don't get to do that at work most of the time, and we may not do that with our husbands and wives and girlfriends and kids and parents and co-workers and all that. So it's good that what I do, maybe it makes somebody cry or laugh or feel something very genuine. And knowing that gives me enormous pleasure. And occasionally I get an email or a letter from somebody saying, you know, I just saw this thing and what you did really moved me. And I think I probably get more pleasure from that one email that one person had 1 minute of an experience. You know, what I do for a living is I create experiences. And that is life. Life is a set of experiences. And you string them together and they become stories. And they become eventually the story of our lives. So if by creating emotions, if I'm a purveyor of experiences, by creating an experience, I've created some kind of response that in some way adds depth to that person, just like I go out and look for experiences that are going to increase my depth as a person. That does give me a wonderful feeling to know that I've done something for somebody. You know, for any parents whose children are thinking about pursuing the arts, the best thing is to encourage them and encourage them and encourage them and encourage them. And remind them that nothing of value is ever achieved without hard work. And to remember that discipline is oftentimes vital, even if it's starting a punk band. And never say no, never say can't. You know, never say shouldn't. Don't worry about plan B too much. Never go against that sense, but don't take it lightly. Don't take it for granted, and just always push towards doing all the things that can enable that to happen. So, if somebody thinks they want to be a pop singer, get them into vocal lessons and get them into piano lessons. You know, if somebody wants to be, you know, a percussionist, a drummer, get them a decent drum kit and get them a good teacher. If somebody wants to be a film composer, take them to the movies every weekend. You know, go get books of interviews with film composers. There are quite a few out now, and there's books on film music, and just, you know, every human being is entitled to pursue their dreams no matter what, you know? Kids dream of being astronauts, you know? How many people have walked on the moon out of how many people have been alive during that period of time, you know? So is it point 0.0000000000001% of the population, will actually make it easier. How many people who said they wanted to be an astronaut got to walk on the moon? 0.0000001. But some people got to walk on the moon. You know, whatever, it was 6 people or 8 people walked on the moon. How dare anybody say no to somebody who says, that's what I want to do? Besides, you can always change your mind.
Thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you really a lot for having me be a part of this.
Appreciate it.